Oh, there you go. You catch me live in a slightly awkward moment as we kick off another episode of Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. I'm currently trying to open a bottle of Villiera Brut, but it's one that Jeff Grier, who's got a wicked sense of humour, has sent with added effervescence. And having a bottle open with a cork up my nose and half of it end up on top of my laptop a little earlier on in the season, I'm trying to be as delicate as I can to make sure that, most importantly, I don't lose any of the Cap Classique. Because whereas Formula One drivers would have you believe that losing half the bottle when you open it is the way to go, I believe that is just a terrible waste of wine, especially if it is wine as good as the Villiera Tradition, which is what we are drinking now. There we go. I think I've done, so let me just get that out the way. Voila. All right, so very good evening and a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. And thank you for joining us ahead of the Easter weekend, a weekend where, well, I hope you've got your wine bought, because for the next 4 days, I'm afraid all bets are off. Sales are closed. From a retail perspective, you still can get wine at a restaurant if you're going out to a wine bar. I think it includes if you're going out to a wine estate, but maybe our guest today will be able to enlighten me. And two great guests there. A little later in the show, Reino Kruger joins me from Stellenview Premium Wines with their Kruger Family Reserve. Bottles of wine you battle to pick up at more than one at a time. They are big, hefty bottles with, I suspect, some wine to match, trying some Chardonnay and some Shiraz out of Stellenbosch a little later on today. But we kick off the show with a Cape Wine Master, somebody who sits very much at the fore of any conversation you have in South Africa when it comes to Cap Classique. We tend to immediately think of Bubbles Ferreira and of the father and son Malan combination. Jeff Grier really does sit in that rarefied space at the top end of making Cap Classique in South Africa. And it's an absolute delight to have him with us from Villiera. Jeff, a very good evening.
Hi, good evening, Dan. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, it's a long overdue pleasure for me, and I'm very sorry we haven't had you on the show yet, but what a way to make the debut, trying out some Cap Classique and trying it with somebody who probably knows this space as well as anybody. And I include Mr. Ferreira in that conversation because I don't think even the great Mr. Bubbles has gone so far as to do a thesis on the impact of champagne on making method Cap Classique around the world.
Yeah, that is correct. And I did that in 87. And it was basically something that interested me because, you know, we actually began producing bubbly in 84. That's when we bought the farm Villiera. And we actually teamed up with a French champagne producer because we wanted to avoid reinventing the wheel. And we felt that to go to the source would be the best way of getting all the correct information that had been handed down over generations. And it fast-tracked us to success in the category. But I had this interest in the fact that champagne was a limited area and they had to expand somehow. They had plenty of cash available and they started investing in the New World. And we were the first people to use a champagne grower's advice. And so I wrote a thesis on the development of bottle fermented sparkling wine around the world with the help of champagne's influence.
And that particular fondness, I suspect, had been there for a while. But in particular, I think you finished studying about 1979. You were done in Stellenbosch. And then instead of starting straight away in South Africa, you went off to France and you really cut your teeth there. How much did that shape and influence your philosophy on winemaking and your approach to it?
I think it was critical because, you know, in those days, it wasn't that easy. But to actually go to the source of not only champagne, but other categories helps you to really get a deep understanding from the guys that have learned from their fathers, and you know the know-how has been passed down. And of course, in France, they have a very strong affiliation with place, so a sense of place is critical. And but particularly champagne, I went back for 3 vintages. Well, the first time I went was in 1980, then 82, then 84, 85, and 86. And every second or third year I go back even today. But it's great to learn from the horse's mouth. That's I mean, everyone can go and study winemaking at a university, but to get the information from the horse's mouth is critically important, I think.
What about the sense of life experience? I often talk to particularly the rugby players who join me on the Dan Nichols show, and they talk to me about how spending time in France has opened them up to this whole new cultural world that they'd never imagined, let alone encountered. Yours was a wine space rather than a rugby space, but for a young man out of South Africa, beyond just learning how to make extraordinarily good Method Champenoise wine. What about Jeff the person? How did it open your eyes? How was that experience?
Yeah, it was a huge eye opener, and I mean, I watch your program on the rugby players and the sport folks that come and join you, and sometimes I wonder how they spend 3 or 4 years in France and they don't seem to be able to speak much French, and that is a bit of an issue. If you go to France and you want to learn something from the guys over there, you need to try and put a bit of an effort into learning French, especially on the wine side. And you do sort of immerse yourself in the culture there. And I mean, we've gone to the extreme of actually buying a vineyard in the south of France, because our consultant, who was in a royalty agreement with us for 10 years, left Champagne because there was a family inheritance issue, and he actually went to the next biggest appellation for producing sparkling wine in France, which is a place called Limoux, which is in Languedoc. And I used to go and visit him there, and we discovered the beauty of that part of the world, and we ended up buying a place there. We actually make some bubbly there as well in the south of France. And so the experience and the becoming familiar with that culture has been very important to me as a person, and I haven't regretted a moment.
I can hear the French accent just coming through ever so gently there, Monsieur Grier. On peut l'écouter just a touch. And I'd actually heard about that French champagne that you are making. I'd love to touch on that just a little later. But we're leading towards not just your tradition, but also yet another celebration of 50 wonderful years of making bubbles here in South Africa. There's clearly something about Cap Classique that got under your skin that really just meant so much to you. Can you put your finger on what it was? Maybe there was a moment, a particular bottle, a particular experience that just said to you, you know what, Jeff, this is the stuff for me.
Yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint a moment, but I mean, firstly, when we started at Villiera, we were looking for something that would differentiate us. And although Simonsen had started making bubbly at 71, we felt that there was a lot of opportunity there to do something unique and different. And we met a champagne producer, and this guy was extremely interesting, and he basically managed to get us excited enough to feel that was the category we should be going for. And he felt that he had spent some time in South Africa, and he felt that South Africa was capable of producing great bubbly. And the one thing I love about bubbly is that it's not only a vineyard concept. It's one of the most technical wine products to make, and so you actually spend more time with the product. I mean, our average length of time in the cellar is about 3 years. So we actually handle the bottle a lot. We walk past those bottles all day, every day, and they spend time with us, and we spend a lot more effort on producing a bottle of bubbly than just about anything else. And I think that connection that you have with your product is quite important in the passion that you develop for it.
And that passion coupled with the know-how would have been so important. It's important today. But if I think about when you were starting to make bubbles at Villiera, Cap Classique in South Africa was just over a decade old, so it was still relatively early days. And I don't think there is any wine made elsewhere in the world that is always going to have such a direct comparison as bubbles will to champagne, given the iconic nature of it. So when you started out making this, how nervous were you? How excited were you? How much pressure was on you to produce something that you knew had to live up to the kind of benchmark that champagne sets?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we felt a bit of that pressure. And I must say that the fact that I teamed up with a champagne producer, and I had the opportunity to go to Champagne, basically helped to give me confidence at a faster rate than most guys would get. And so I think I managed to overcome those nerves quite quickly. And he could go through what we were doing and tell us we were on the right track or not. And today, people like myself and Bubbles Ferreira and Johan Milan basically pass on that experience and know-how to the younger crowd to try and allow them to not feel as much pressure as they might have felt. But I mean, they kind of, in a way, have to not necessarily live up to champagne, but live up to the Cap Classiques that have gone before them.
And I was actually going to make exactly that point, and that you might have been chasing after the standards of the estates that you'd worked at over in France, the houses that you'd spent some time with, but the legacy that you mentioned, 3 great names, including yourself and others have built up. The guys who are making Cap Classique now, I think, are doing an extraordinary job, and we have some wonderful, wonderful bubbles in South Africa. But a big part of that, in my opinion, is that you guys guided them there. You gave them something to live up to, and very early on said, you know what, South Africa, we can make stuff that's every bit as good as the French.
Absolutely. And the difference is the climate and to a certain extent the soil. But in terms of technique, we follow it precisely, and the Cap Classique Association has a set of rules that determine what you can do and what you can't do. And we also have a base wine tasting every year where we basically taste everyone's products critically, and we're quite blatant about what we think. And in that way, there's pressure to try and make sure you pass the test every year. And I think that's been something unique amongst the Cap Classique producers, is that we had an association for our category early on, and we basically ensured that the standard was met. And as a result, off a fairly small base, but Cap Classique has been one of the big growth categories, and it is one of the categories that people overseas really respect. Of course, the pandemic affects bubbly more than anything, because it is a celebratory drink. But we'll get back to celebrating. When everyone's vaccinated, we'll be celebrating.
Well, I think there's a study to be done on the impact of wine doubling as a very effective vaccine, and I'm doing my own personal research in great volumes. I'll keep you posted on the results. Yeah, we've got a few people coming in. I think you will recognize this particular name, Josephine Prieur. Bonjour, Jeff, my great friend. And following up with lovely and wonderful wines at Villiera, missing my visit and the wine tasting. Always a big privilege to be with Jeff at the winery. Josephine, a regular guest watching us on the show, and clearly one of many big fans of Jeff. And then a Skalk Stapelberg, regular visitor to Villiera, absolutely fantastic. We're going to confirm that in just a moment with some of the Villiera tradition. And Wellington Moromba, who we had on the show not that long ago, great wine culture and creative styles. Thanks, Wellington, and thank you for joining us. And talking about that creative style, it leads us nicely into what we're about to try, which is this tradition in our 50th year of making Cap Classique in South Africa. 2 broad strokes of questions for you, Jeff. First of all, I know you say it's exactly the same method. In terms of the complete approach, is there anything that you tweak that might be seen as slightly different to the way things are approached in France? And then what is it about what we have here in South Africa that gives us a distinctive Cap Classique, that if you're setting it against a champagne, we could say, this is the style, this is the approach, this makes it South African in my mind?
Well, a lot of good questions, but firstly, South Africa is blessed with sun, and so certainly our style is going to be a bit riper with a little bit more of a fruit element and slightly lower acidity. And I think that basically suits the kind of customer that we have in South Africa. But we actually started making our bubbly with French analysis. I mean, we picked really early, and then I went not only to France, but I went off to California and various places, and I discovered that they were picking a bit riper. So we decided to pick slightly riper, and we ended up with a product that was more suited to the South African conditions. And even then, it's still relatively unripe. We're talking about picking grapes at about 19 degrees bulling, which is about just under 11 volume percent alcohol. But we use what we call the cuvee, which is something they do in Champagne. But for non-vintage, they would possibly use a second selection as well, what they call a tie. But in our case, we use only the cuvee. And then, the tradition is quite standard, and we make it in a sort of a value category. And it's a wine that's sold at a relatively young age of about 2 years old. And because these wines are perfected by time, and our prestige cuvee, the Munro Brut, is 5 years on the yeast and a year on the cork before we start selling. But at that level, we're doing different things like using some barrel fermentation, and we're actually working on a super premium bubbly where we're using amphora, which is something I haven't seen in Champagne yet, but it's bound to come because there are amphora being used in France. And so we're following the Champagne lead, and that's I think that's quite important.
Well, it's a Champagne lead that gives us the wine we're about to taste. A couple of other comments coming in. The fabulous Reginald Peck up at Cheetah Plains in Sabi Sands joins us most shows. Lovely to see you, head of Grier Family. Villiera bubbles are made for celebratory events. 2021 is the year. Thanks for bringing up those French velocities into the bottle. Bayedenkosi Jeff. Thanks, Reginald. And a Grand Souls watching over on YouTube. I enjoy the Villiera Rosé Brut, but my favorite is still the Villiera Gewürztraminer, a wine that is pronounced even better when you've had a few glasses of it. Great wines and MCC. So some nice accolades. You got a big fan club. The wine we're drinking now, Jeff, is part of that fan club. It is the Tradition. And it looks traditional and lovely, and it just speaks to the history of both the Villiera brand and the wine within. Talk us through it, the approach to making this, and what makes it quite so special, Jeff.
Okay, so this was the first product that we made in 1984, and we called it Tradition because we're using the traditions of Champagne, and today we like to think of ourselves as using the traditions of the past to reimagine the future. And we see ourselves as quite an innovative family, and we've done many things that have been regarded as very innovative. And we were the first to do a royalty agreement with a champagne producer. We were the first to do a Brut Rosé. We were the first to do a Brut Natural, which is basically zero dosage type bubbly from Chardonnay. Just to do a prestige cuvee, and then something under 10 alcohol. But the Tradition is basically the base of our bubbly business. It's the non-vintage that people can afford and use at weddings, and it's a real celebratory aperitif style of bubbly. And we use Chardonnay, Pinot Noir. Some years we use some Pinot Meunier, And in some years, we actually use Pinotage, which is a uniquely South African grape, instead of the Meunier, because it performs the same role of bringing the wine to maturity a little bit earlier. And then we taste 20 different base wine tanks from different parts of the vineyard, picked at slightly different ripeness levels. And sometimes we even look at the possibility of including some reserve wine, which is basically a tradition that's been kept in tank in order to maintain a consistent style from year to year. So that when you buy our non-vintage, you should enjoy the same kind of experience every time. And then we make up the blend. We do the second fermentation in the bottle. We take the bottles off into our cold store, where the yeast that's been added feeds on the sugar that we add to the wine. The sugar is added to give us 6 bars of pressure in the bottle, and then the yeast works on the sugar, creating the magical bubble. It takes about 6 weeks for the fermentation to run its course under cool conditions of about 12 to 14 degrees. And then, of course, the yeast dies off and it settles on the side of the bottle, and that's where the wine picks up its flavor. And the average time that our tradition spends on the yeast is 18 months. And then we basically riddle, disgorge, and we add a dosage. Now, so we do something unique on the dosage, something that doesn't happen in Champagne. And we have what we call a Villiera system, a multi-vintage wine in barrel that we use to make up our dosage. And that's basically used to sweeten the bubbly a little bit, because a brut is basically between 4 and 12 gram per liter. Below 4, it's extra brut, and without any dosage, it's what we call brut zero or brut natural. But our tradition has about 6 gram per liter, so not sweet at all, between 6 and 7, and it's still really dry, fresh acidity, lovely fruit, and a little bit of yeastiness. And as you mature it on the cork, it develops that yeasty character. You know, when the yeast character is fresh, it tastes like baked bread, and then as you leave the wine on the cork for a while, it develops more of a yeasty or toasty character. And then after about 3 years on the cork, it can start to develop what we call yeast extract or marmite-like characters. And that's the way the wine matures and develops. And the pandemic has actually helped us be able to sell older wine, because when sales are good, you dip into your stock, and your sales are of younger product. And the moment the sales are a bit slower, you can actually sell older products. And that's the one thing that time doesn't do any damage to, and that's bubbly. It really benefits from some extra aging. And then the wine goes out to the market. Yeah.
It's a wonderful education you're giving us, Jeff, and I'm learning a vast amount. A question, actually, I remember a friend of mine asking me who'd watched a previous show where Cap Classique was discussed, and somebody else is talking about that reserve. And they asked what I thought was quite an interesting question for the man in the street, the woman in the street, and that is, you talk about that reserve. Is it already effervescent at that stage? Is it already bubbling and sparkling and you're just adding it in, or is it still at that point?
Well, it's another good question. So most reserve wine is kept in still wine form, so either in tank or in barrel, and that gets added to your base wine blend before you go into second fermentation with the yeast and sugar and so on. However, there are producers, not here, but in Champagne, that keep their reserve in bottle, but they would to keep it fresh, they bottle it with half the amount of sugar, so it has just a light effervescence. So it's not a problem to open the wine and pour it back into the tank to blend with your base wine blend. But reserve wine is the way you maintain consistency, because you take some of last year's wine, which is actually blended with vintages before, to bring into the blend to maintain the consistency. It's less of a problem in South Africa. In Champagne, they have to do it because their climate is all over the place, and some years are very cold and the acidity is high and the alcohols are low. In other years, they get riper fruit. So for them, have reserve wine is critical, and for them to, I mean, can you imagine if they have a cold vintage, the alcohol's low, the acid's high, they need to bring in a reserve wine from a warmer year, and then in a warmer year they probably need to bring in reserve wine from a cooler year to get the balance right.
And there I was thinking, Jeff, that you just spent all day drinking Cap Classique out of the bottle and relaxing. There's clearly a little bit more work involved in it to all of that. And it's work that forms part of this wonderful narrative of 50 years that we celebrate in 2021, half a century of making Cap Classique in South Africa. If I take you back to 1984 and a youthful Jeff Grier cracking on with this Villiera plan and this objective, if I'd asked you then or told you then that the Cap Classique market, the environment would look today as it does, do you think you would have believed me that we would have got this far, have so many producers and have such a consistent standard of excellence across the top level?
Well, Dan, I've always liked to think big and positive, but I at that time I had no idea that we would be where we are today. I mean, I didn't even know that we would be able to export half our product. So it's definitely been a massive ride, and we've enjoyed every minute of it. But the big progress and growth happened in the early 2000s. And then 2008 came along and, basically put a bit of a dampener on growth. But then it started to happen again, and the pandemic comes along and slows it all down. But I suppose that's how things go. But if you think positive and you have these dreams and you try to realize them, anything can happen. And even with alcohol bans last year, we thought we were dead. It's amazing how quickly you recover. And there's a massive market out there that love what we do, not only Villiera, but what the wine industry does in the Cape. And there was a lot of sympathy buying and a lot of people buying to support the industry here and overseas.
There is a good reason for that, Jeff, and that is because you and your compatriots in the industry continue to make such fabulous Cap Classique. And it's on the point of fabulous bubbles that I'll ask you one last question, and it's a three-parter, and you might need to delve into the memory banks here a little. I'd like you to give us, Jeff, over the, well over 30 years now, closing in on 40 years you've been making Cap Classique, your single best Cap Classique that you feel you've made, your favorite South African Cap Classique that you've had over your time as a winemaker outside of Villiera, and then your all-time favorite bottle of champagne.
Dan, it's like asking me which is my favorite child. So I would say probably the biggest success we had, and I personally also agreed with all the judging panels around the world, was probably our 2007 bubbly. It was a cooler vintage, and I think our 2007 Munro Brut was probably the best we ever did. I don't know if you ever heard of a competition called the Tri-Nations that Michael Fridjon used to operate. And we ended up winning that New World competition between Australia, South Africa, and Chile. And I think Argentina came into it eventually as well. But we had the best bubbly, and in fact, it was the best wine overall on that particular competition. I think that was 5 years later, so it would have been in about 2012 the judging happened. And then it got a platter 5-star and the rest of it. But I actually agreed with the judges on that one. So 2007 Munro Brut, probably our best. And we've had some close seconds to that, but that was special. And then locally, where am I going to go with this one? I think I'm going to give it. I think I'm going to give it to Simon's Cuvée Royale, and they've got a 2017 that I tasted the other day, and it's a Cuvée Royale that they put out in the 50th anniversary year, and I think they paid special attention to it. And it's got beautiful freshness, classic yeasty flavors, and does come from the iconic Johan Milan, who started, or whose father started Cap Classique in South Africa. So I think that's a safe one to go for. And then in terms of my favorite champagne of all time, it's a toss-up, and I have to make it a toss-up because I had a Magnum of Comte de Champagne 2000. It was actually, it wasn't a 2000. It was a 1995, but I drank it in the year 2000, in the millennium year, and it was iconic. Very, very special. Comte de Champagne is a Blanc de Blanc, 100% Chardonnay. And when it comes from a Magnum, it's even more special because it matures a bit slower, and it was great. But I'm also a big fan of Rudra Grand Année, which is their sort of vintage product. And I had a 98 Rudra Grand Année, which was probably my best blend from Champagne. How's that for a selection?
That is a pretty impressive selection, not just for the quality, but for the political dexterity with which you diplomatically present it to ensure no one's unfriending you on Facebook by the end of the Jeff, I could sit here and talk to you about bubbles for hours. You're an absolute wealth of knowledge, and you've produced so many great years and so much great wine. Thank you for sharing a little of your time with us. Thank you for being such an important part of both the South African wine story and for this evening's purposes, the Cap Classique story. And I really look forward to coming down, spending some more time with you. And hopefully in the next month or two, when you've got a gap, we'll have you back on the show or set bubbles aside for half an hour and chat about some of the other fabulous wine you make there as well.
Great, Dan. Would love to see you down here. And just a shout out to Josephine, because I was surprised to see her on your show. Great. Thank you so much. Enjoyed it. Enjoyed chatting to you.
I'll leave you with one final comment there, Jeff, and this is from my mother, who lives in Belfast in Northern Ireland, who is in a very foul mood this morning because she drank her last bottle of Classique and was having to make do with champagne until she can get hold of some more South African fare.
Great stuff. Thank you.
So, Jeff Grier from Villiera, Cape Wine Master, won all number of awards for all number of wines, but with a particular passion for the art of Cap Classique, as you've seen this evening. So big thank you. Now, Jeff's only spent a fair amount of time in France. Our second guest tonight has also spent some time in France. He's travelled a fair bit of the wine-making world. He's the man behind Stellenview Premium Wines, who give us the Kruger Family Reserve. Joins us now on Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. Randy, very good evening. Welcome to the show.
Hi, good afternoon, Dan. How are you?
I'm very well. Lovely to have you on. We had a great chat there with Jeff about all manner of things, and in particular his just his experience, the stories he had. Where would Jeff Grier sit in terms of the winemakers you looked up to as you were making your way into the winemaking world?
Well, I mean, I started out in Rawsonville with a company called Uni Wines, and during my time, my stint with them, I lucky enough to work with direct wines in France, down from the southern tip, from Saint-Tropez all the way through to Bordeaux. Stunt out in France. Beautiful time. We were exposed to quite a lot of different wine styles and so forth. Amazing time in my young career. And then shortly after, I was also allowed to go to United States. The group Kenwell Jackson in their La Crema winery, which is one of their premium wineries, with a lot of focus on Chardonnay.
Some great international experience. In terms of that shaping, for me, it's always such a crucial part in a winemaker's journey when they've had time to go overseas to see how wine operates and works in different parts of the world. How much of an impact did that have on who Reino, the winemaker, is today?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I was taught was a French winemaker, Jean-Marc Siboa. I believe he's still with Direct Wines, most probably. Could speak 7 languages fluently, and he always said to us, to make a wine, it is about telling a story. Each wine has got its story behind it, and with the focus of La Crema around Chardonnay and the Shiraz, it shaped definitely my future going forward. And looking differently at your vineyard selections and wine styles and the way to actually make them.
And you've spent time in all of these places, time in Napa, time in Saint-Tropez, time in Rawsonville. So you've done the big 3 really, and you now find yourself in Stellenbosch. Talk to us about this partnership, how Stellenview works. I know it's you and it's another company. You bring the world of wine together. How does the operation work out?
Well, Stellenview is based in Devon Valley, which is one of the sub-boards in Stellenbosch. We've got a winery called Le Grand Domain. It's state-of-the-art boutique winery built on gravity fed. So basically grapes are received on the top level, then cooled down. We've got refrigeration on the top level, and then of course it's taken to the normal fermentation area. So we basically got a couple of vineyards ourselves, and then we are lucky enough to be able to source the best that Stellenbosch can deliver in all 7 subboards and bring it into our winery and create master blends. We've got a good team of winemakers, myself also being a winemaker, assisting, and that's basically how we do it. Have different selections of vineyards. As I said earlier, it gives you a lot more leniency for your blends and so forth.
Which leads us to the wine that we're going to be trying this evening, the Kruger Family Reserve range. I had to do a little bit of research. It's not a wine I've seen an awful amount of in the past, Joanna, but I get the sense that a fair amount of it finds its way beyond South African borders.
Yeah, so basically, to give you the background, Stellenview exports about 95% of what we produce. We ship out about 240,000 cases annually, 9 liters, and it mostly finds its way to Western Europe, and then, of course, to China, Thailand, and the Far East. So we predominantly export. We have set up some very good markets out there, and so we are now currently looking at getting a slightly bigger footprint within South Africa, and it will take some time getting into the market. The current conditions aren't very conducive to new listings, but I'm sure that in the long run we will succeed.
Well, you've clearly got some supporters. Mafeta de Cochla, who's watching at the moment. I love your Pinotage Kruger wines. Mafeta amongst your fans. And then Pippa Pringle, who samples vast amounts of wine, all in a very professional point of departure. I recently enjoyed the Kruger Family Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon, without doubt, one to include in your cellar. And I look forward to sampling the rest of this stellar range. Well, I'm going to be sampling some of it tonight, not the Cabernet Sauvignon, but the Shiraz, and first of all, the Chardonnay. And it's probably the reds, the cabs, the Bordeaux blends generally tend to headline the Stellenbosch story right now. But Stellenbosch Chardonnay, particularly over the last 4 or 5 vintages, I get the feeling has just been making more and more of a splash and raising a lot more eyebrows, both in South Africa and internationally.
Well, the Chardonnay that we've produced, the grapes come from Bangkok, which is about 270 meters above sea level. In Bangkok, of course, been known for the Shiraz and Chardonnay that is produced in the area. So meticulously, we've basically harvested the grapes at about 23.5 bulling, which is quite ripe. Then we bring it into the winery. It is put into refrigerated containers. It's left there overnight. Thereafter, we will destem some of the batches, and others would be whole bunch pressing. And we will then separate the free juice, settle it overnight, and then inoculate with very specific yeast strains. I foremost like DV10, which is a very neutral yeast type, very strong fermenter as well. And we will bring it down to about 12 degrees and slowly start the fermentation. And at about 16 bricks or bulling, whichever you want to call it, we will take it into barrel. So it's 100% barrel fermented. The barrels that we select is tight grain barrel with medium toasting. Even the heads we toast, but as you can see with the tight grain, it respects the fruit on the actual wine, and it gives a very, very nice balance, but not overpowering the fruit on the actual wine.
It's a wine that I'm sampling for the very first time. It's a tough job I have to do here, Reino, tasting all this fabulous wine.
Well, I'm sure it must be very tough.
But it's one that the more you taste, and I said flippantly, but the more you drink, the more you pick up on the nuance and the subtlety and the different components that make up wine. And I just feel Stellenbosch Chardonnay is in such an exciting place for me as a drinker, for a consumer, for you as a winemaker. What does it offer you? What's the real attraction in terms of giving you a palate to work from, giving you something to really get creative with?
Well, I extremely enjoy the fact that Chardonnay is usually a little bit more tempered than Sauvignon Blanc. I find a lot of the Sauvignon Blancs being slightly acidic for myself or my own palate. So I very much enjoy the Chardonnay with the richness, the fullness. It also speaks to a wider broad of food types that you can consume with it. And I like a full-bodied wooded Chardonnay, different to just the normal unwooded Chardonnays that we find in South Africa. And specifically this wine, if you look at it, it's a 2017 vintage, and it carries itself very well. I also find that we sometimes consume our white wines way too early. So you can see how this bottle of wine has matured and really is coming into place.
It's a wine that on its own is drinking delightfully. I'd also like to see where it's going in a couple of years' time. So I think it's definitely got some age potential. I'm also obsessed with what to eat with my wine. If I'm dropping round to the Krugers for dinner tonight and Chardonnay is on the wine list, what are you cooking? What for you is going perfectly with a specific glass of wine, Reino?
Well, I mean, it can go with any cheese platter. That would be perfect. And myself, being traveling to the Far East very regularly, I would like some cold duck with this. It would be perfectly suited for that.
Ooh, that's inspired. Let's just make very clear, though, it's cold duck as in the duck that is not warm, as opposed to bubbles at a slightly more entry-level space. But some cold duck could be fabulous. I really like that. I also really like the comments I'm getting in, and there are a fair few of them. Martin Ryder, I'm a big Sauvignon Blanc drinker and love the Kruger Family Reserve. So Martin amongst this growing list of fans. Gary Power, I love the extensive Stellenview premium wines range and the Kruger Reserve range. Definitely one of my favorites, specifically the Shiraz. Also tasted the Kruger Chardonnay recently, and for someone who prefers red, was super impressed with the quality of the wine. Thanks for sharing. So Gary, a fan of that Shiraz, as is Christian Duplessis. Love the Kruger Shiraz. One of the best I have tasted. You're getting a fair amount of praise here, Mr. Kruger. So your wine's going to have to live up to it. I've got some extreme expectations here. I'll pour them for myself. Introduce me to this Shiraz that the entire world seems to absolutely adore.
Well, Shiraz has been one of our favorites. Again, the grapes come from Devon Valley. Specifically with the deep clay soils, your huttings and so forth. Very little irrigation, very little handling, low tonnage, probably about 8 tons to the hectare. which gives it a lot of fruit concentration. We do bring in some grapes from the other sub-boards in Stellenbosch, out of the Helderberg area, again, Banghoek, Portlaray, Stellenbosch, Kloof, and so forth. So it gives us a quite ample ground to work with different components. And again, it's using different barrel types. I predominantly like to use second and third full barrels, all 300 liters, which basically respects the fruit on the wine, which you can definitely pick up in the Shiraz. We bring grapes in slightly riper. We like to harvest at about 25.5 up to 26, bulling to give a nice big full wine. And yes, we've also been quite lucky with the awards. The specific wine is now the follow-up from the previous vintage, which was the 2016. The 2016 was rated under the top 12 best Shirazes in South Africa by the Shiraz Challenge. It's also received China Wine and Spirits Accolade Gold. And recently, the most recent award, which made us very proud, it got a Decanter 94. And I believe that the 2017 is following close in the footsteps.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it does, because 2017 as a vintage is one that has been widely celebrated. And just 3 or 4 weeks ago, we did a fairly extensive show with 5 different estates with Cab Sav going 15 and 17 and comparing them. From a Shiraz perspective, is 17 as striking a vintage as it appears to be for Cabernet Sauvignon?
Sorry, Dan, I just missed you there for a second. You were saying 2017 vintage.
Yeah, just asking. We did a show a few weeks ago where we compared the 15 and 17 Cabernet Sauvignons out of Stellenbosch with 5 of the top producers. If I'm looking at Shiraz, do you feel 2017 is as striking a year for that grape as it is in Stellenbosch for Cabernet Sauvignon?
Yeah, but what I would say is, of course, we had the drought in those years, and I do feel, with the soil types that we have, the deep alluvial soils, the Hattings and so forth, those grapes are buffered slightly better than certain other areas, and I think with the lower yield, most definitely we're going to have some showstoppers coming through.
All right. Again, more people agree. Either that, or you've got about 26 different Facebook accounts, Reino. Chris Stain saying, great Shiraz, subtle pepper tone, smooth drinking, top 10 for me. Reginald Peckler, again from Cheetah Plains. Reino, 2017 vintage, such a magic year to be a never-ending subject. You have some great gems out there. Keep it up. And Marie Douglas, amazing range of wines. Love the Sauvignon Blanc. So you've got a big fan base. For somebody who sells most of his wine around the world, there are clearly still plenty of South Africans who discovered the wine and really, really liked it. And there's a real pride in exporting the wine. But I think it must also be quite special for you as a winemaker and as a proudly South African winemaker to know that your wine is also finding such favourite home and that your fellow South Africans are really enjoying what you're making.
Well, lockdown forced us to change a little bit of our strategy. And, come the 26th of March last year, we were faced with, like the rest of the industry, with some difficulties. And within the first 3 weeks, I created our Shopify account, and Stellenview went online in South Africa with all our brands, and currently still running. It's just www.stellenview.co.za, and we've built up quite a following on our online sales. But yes, to answer you, the most amazing thing is to actually see your product where you started planning it 5 years previously, and then you travel overseas and you arrive in Russia, in Moscow, and you actually see one of your bottles on the shelf in one of the retail stores. That was the most, I think, probably the most rewarding could be probably the most rewarding for myself, seeing it out there, and it's doing pretty well. Yeah.
I get excited when I see a bottle of South African wine somewhere unexpected around the world. So as the person who's actually made it, I can imagine the goosebumps when you encounter exactly that. And it's lovely to hear South African success stories like this. I want to wrap up on the Shiraz with these similar questions to the one I asked you about the Chardonnay, Reino, and that is dinner, because it's another marvelous wine from a fantastic year, and another one that's still got plenty of time in it. But if I'm drinking it now, what's for dinner with the Shiraz?
Well, being a South African, I'd probably say it should be a very good braai, some steak, some fillets, and some roasted veggies. That would be my personal favorite with this wine. It's good and spicy. It carries well. Good tannin structure. So, yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Nice and simple, but it sounds absolutely fabulous, and it's now left me feeling rather peckish. So before I nip out to go and buy myself some late night steak and prepare it to go with my Shiraz, just throwing forward, we live in strange times, whatever industry you're in, but the wine world in particular is one that's had a hammering, and in a lot of cases is still fairly uncertain. How optimistic, how positive is Reino feeling about Stellenview in particular and the South African wine industry as a whole?
Well, for Stellenview, we've basically got a very wide base for exports. And luckily, most of our exports was in the off-trade. And I think off-trade overseas was less affected than the people, which is mainly in on-trade. And we've not seen our figures being, or figures are declining. It's in actual fact, it's actually grown due to the fact that most people can only buy in the off-trade, which is the supermarkets and your high-end bottle stores. So we didn't really see the effect on our figures, but one always needs to be vigilant and also look at new opportunities. And I find South Africa in the near future and medium future, it's definitely going to be one of our areas where we'd like to see more growth.
I love hearing people with some optimism. It's much needed, and I don't think it's misplaced at all. I think we do have some brighter moments to look forward to, and clearly Stellenview's future is amongst those, especially with this army of fans. I think they're more fans of Stellenview than of Dan Really Likes Wine at the moment. Cornell Mini, I'm a huge Shiraz fan and recently became a Chardonnay fan thanks to Stellenview. Great wines to choose from for every occasion. And Pippa Pringle agreeing with your food pairing there, Reino. Perfect Shiraz food pairing. Steak and red wine. Hard to get much better than that. Reino, have a lovely Easter weekend. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate the time, sharing both the wine and your own wine story. Looks like you're working hard to keep the brand flying and the South African wine flag going high. So keep that up. Keep making fabulous wine, and look forward to having you back on the show again soon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dan. You have a good Easter weekend.
I will indeed. There we go. Reino Kruger from Stellenview, and doing a wonderful job with both his marketing and his wine. Werner Greef there. Hi all. Your marketing is excellent. Well, I think just judging by the number of fans there, that applies specifically to Stellenview. Two great guests tonight. Big thank you to Reino, also to Jeff Grier from Villiera, who joined us a little earlier. Such a terrific story about being a big part of getting Cap Classique up and running in South Africa. 50 years this year, and a little later on this year, I think it's September, we hit the official 50-year mark, and there will be much celebration on Dan Really Likes Wine. Werner Greef making it very clear that it's Stellenview that has the great marketing and not Dan Really Likes Wine. All right, Werner, we'll make sure that we improve our marketing to try and get it up with that of Stellenview. Thank you to all of you for watching, for being part of it. It's been a great show tonight. Now, remember, if you're not already part of the Pick and Pay Wine Club, why on earth not? It is free of charge. You simply send your smart shopper number via text message, via SMS, through one simple message to 36775, and this is what you get. It is 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine you buy, every box, every case, every magnum. You get 20% off 10 great different wines every month. There is also a special deal on a magnum, a special deal on a case. You get some great competitions. In fact, Jeff Grier this month have a super competition, and we'll be talking to them a little later on in the month. And there are also some cool events that you get access to. So all told, really, if you're not a member, you certainly need to be. Thank you so much for joining us. Look out for Monday. I know it's Easter Monday, but we are not stopping. The work never ends on Dan Really Likes Wine. We'll be heading over to Spain in the area of Rioja, where Valenciso, one of these Spanish Rioja labels that is available here in South Africa. I love Rioja. And we'll be getting the Rioja story with a very special member of the Spanish winemaking community on Monday evening. If you haven't seen it already, the second part of our great 2-part interview with Michael Frijon is up and running on either Facebook, YouTube, or danreallylikeswine.com. Michael is fascinating, his story even more so, and it makes for some wonderful wine entertainment. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And one final follow-up, there's a Ferner Geef saying that he was promised free wine to say nice things about Stellenview. I very much doubt that, because Stellenview have some lovely wine and a great team to back it. Thanks to Jeff, thanks to Reino, thanks to all of you for joining us. Have a wonderful, safe Easter weekend, and we'll see you Monday evening for Valenciso and Rioja. Until then, catch the Michael Frijon piece if you can. I'll see you Monday. Goodbye. Cheers.